Hi, my name is Ricardo, and in this video I want to talk about board meetings within non-profit organizations. Now I just want to deal with some of the critical issues that I think are important, and perhaps to start off by saying, I've looked at the agenda items of many organizations, and I find that often you have standard items on the agendas of board meetings, like the apologies, welcome and apologies, the matters arising, and then also some of the issues dealing with finances and the operations. But I think it's time for organizations to re-look at the agenda items and to find out what are some of the important issues that should be on the agenda. And really, the governing board should provide input and insight into the governance issues for organizations. And I actually want to use some of the comments or recommended practices in the King report, the King 4 report, on board meetings, so that if you meet together as an organization, you also deal with critical issues regarding governance. Now, there are some developments that have taken place over the years, and I think it's important that some of those feature on the board's agenda. So let's look at some of those. So firstly, before starting with the hardcore issues of governance, what I think is important is to encourage board members to tell stories about the organization. Now, that doesn't have to be a formal item on the board's agenda, but I think the board should be very deliberate in promoting stories of the organization. Now, to give an example, a couple of years ago, I've done a workshop with a group of board members, and there was a bit of hostility on the board. And at some point, it was over a 3-day period. At some point, I asked board members a very basic question: why do you serve on the board of this organization? And board members gave their different input. The most profound input was actually from the project manager, who was not on the board, and she explained how the organization came into existence. And it's basically because when she came from school one day, she saw a child that was chained to a tree. Now, the child had a mental disability, and both parents were working. So their solution to their challenge was to chain the child to a tree. And that disturbed this project manager, and she decided that once she completed her studies, she was going to make a difference in the community. And then she actually started that organization. The unfortunate reality was that nobody knew who were on the board, nobody knew how the organization started. But when she shared that story, it made a significant difference in the atmosphere for that workshop. And all of a sudden, board members realized that actually we're here to serve a bigger purpose. We're not here, to deal with our dislikes and our internal disputes. We should be focused more on governance of the organization and on the beneficiaries. And stories geared at telling the difference the organization is making the difference the organization is making with the beneficiaries, I think, are essential for any organization. So as a soft issue, I think that's very important. Now, let's look at some of the hardcore issues that should be on the board's agenda. So as I said, I'm going to look at King 4 and look at some of the recommendations coming out of King 4. And the first issue that I think is important is the issue of legal compliance. Now, if that's not a standard item on your agenda for the board meeting, you need to insert it as a standard agenda item, because legal compliance is important. And for any organization, you have to ensure that you comply with the relevant laws. So let's look at this comment from King 4. And then it also recommends that continual monitoring of the regulatory environment and the developments are responded as necessary. So legal compliance is clearly an important item with regards to governance, and especially in the South African context where we've got so many laws. Some of them are applicable to non-profits, some are not, but you need to know which laws are applicable and how the organization should respond. And I like what the King report is saying. It's also an opportunity, especially in the context where there's a lot of non-compliance with non-profit organizations that are on the Directorate for Non-Profit Organizations website. So it's an opportunity for your organization to demonstrate that we are actually compliant with the relevant legislation. Another item that I consider to be important is the issue of board development. So board members should be exposed to regular training opportunities. That shouldn't only occur at the staff level, but it should occur at board level as well. So the organization should be deliberate to make sure that board members are briefed in terms of relevant developments. And again, let's look at what the King 4 report is saying in this regard. So you may say that, well, we don't have funds in our organization to board training. I would actually say you don't need a lot of funds to start with the basics of board training. When you can start with YouTube, you could ask somebody even on the board might be knowledgeable in a particular area on governance, and you can ask somebody to do a presentation at the organization, one of the board members. Often I find when I do workshops with organizations, there's somebody on the board that is able and equipped to deal with a particular issue of governance, and you should use the resources that are at your disposal. It might be a 10-minute presentation, a 20-minute presentation, but keep that on the board's agenda. So let's talk about stakeholder relations. I think it's so important to keep in contact with our stakeholders, to find out what's happening with the stakeholders and also how they perceive the organization. So having that as an item on the agenda is very important. Linked to that is the issue of reporting. How do we report? The King 3 report in 2009 referred to integrated reporting, and I think a lot of non-profit organizations have actually not taken that development into account, which I think is an important development, because it talks about reporting as a holistic form of engaging with the stakeholder community. And you will notice a lot of corporates have now provided specific slots to report on issues of governance in their integrated reports, and I think non-profit organizations should do that as well. So while you're re-looking at the issue of agenda items, also look at your reports and perhaps see to what extent you can report. You can change your report to include more reference to issues of governance. So technology governance is also important, especially with the introduction of the Protection of Personal Information Act. Non-profit organizations are not excluded to comply with the provisions of the Act. So you need to consider as an organization how you're going to incorporate compliance requirements with that piece of legislation. And again, you need a holistic approach and look at the opportunities for the organization. If you don't address it, then you're at risk as an organization. The last item that I want to mention in this particular video is board evaluation. I think that should be also a recurring item on the board's agenda, because it should happen on an annual basis. But there should also be other ways of formally evaluating, like board meetings. Perhaps you could ask the question, what went well at the board meeting, and you could also ask what didn't go well, what do we need to change, and like I said at the beginning, what do we need to change in terms of the board's agenda items? There are constantly new things developing in the external environment, and the responsibilities on the board to keep their eyes open and to establish what changes may impact on the organization. So board development, very important. Now, I hope this video has been helpful, and if it has, I would ask you to please click on the like button. And please also share this video with others if you think it would be helpful to their board members.